at least in 1903, probably a little earlier, he moved over onto Lucas Street, which is maybe 1/10 of a mile closer. So he's still a good ways away. He's a lot closer to venues like the Douglas Hotel. He's a lot closer to the venues that were more respectable. So then he leaves to go on tour at the end of 1903 with a guest of honor. That falls apart. He goes away, he marries Freddie Alexander, she dies, he comes back. He lives down on Market Street. Now, mind you, that was right across from where Tom Turpin's Rosebud Saloon was. Okay, I'll buy that. He was at the western end of the bar district at that point. But was he involved? Kind of doubt it. If you read the accounts of his portrayals of him in the white newspapers at the time, in the Post-Dispatch, and the Globe Democrat, he's afforded a level of respect that few African Americans were at that time. He's consistently referred to as Mr. Joplin. In most cases, he would have been simply Joplin or the Negro Joplin, at best. If he was even given a name in the press. He was afforded a level of respect. He was referred to as a dignified and essentially a respectable classical composer. He was afforded a tremendous amount of respect. He was, when he was, the people that knew him were interviewed 40, 50 years later. They remembered somebody who was dignified, who was quiet, who was not flashy and outgoing. That doesn't really fit well with somebody that hangs out in bars all the time. If you hang out in a bar all the time and you're really quiet and shy, nobody's going to pay any attention to you. Certainly not going to publish your music. So really, well, okay, so he was living right across from where the Rosebud was. Except it was closed by then. He was living across the street from where the Rosebud was. Not where it was operating at the time. It was gone by then. In fact, the time he was living there, most of that time he also maintained an address in Chicago. He was oscillating back and forth. So it's kind of hard to imagine him really being smack dab in the middle of all of this wild craziness when the craziness wasn't really there and he wasn't really there, and it's getting harder and harder to put Joplin into this wild, crazy, Hell's Half-Acre red light district, isn't it? Yeah. What about syphilis? He died of syphilis. What about that? How did that work? He had to be. He had syphilis. Come on. So did Henry VIII. Abraham Lincoln and his wife. Franz Schubert, Robert Schubert, Christopher Columbus. Do we associate these folks with red light districts? How many of these folks do we really think about? Oh yeah. Abraham Lincoln, he was.
He was a party animal.
Really? I mean, you think about it, we don't associate these folks as being in that environment.
He also, according to the museum in Springfield and a lot of research, was batting on the same team.
Yeah.
At times.
I'm sure of it. But yet we want to put Scott Joplin in that environment. What's up with that? Something like that. Scott Joplin considered himself, it's pretty clear, he considered himself an African American classical composer. If you look at his School of Ragtime, exercise number 6, the explanation for it reads, "We wish to say here that Joplin ragtime is destroyed by careless or imperfect rendering, and very often good players lose the effect entirely by playing too fast. They are harmonized with the supposition that each note will be played as written, as it takes this and also the proper time divisions to complete the sense intended." That's an approach you take to classical music. That's how somebody would approach Beethoven or Bach or Mozart. Joplin was understanding that that's how he intended his music to be approached. He was taking the approach, okay, this is classical stuff. What's all this about? But if it was classical music, well, wasn't ragtime looked down upon by upper class African Americans? Yeah, it was. It was low class. But I've often wondered about that. It's really puzzled me because, oh, well, it's the music that's played in bars and saloons and honky-tonks. Okay, that's kind of a circular argument, because if it's unacceptable to upper class people and it's acceptable to people of a lower class, why is it acceptable to them and not to the upper class? Because it's played there? Well, no, that's where they are anyway. Why is it acceptable? It's a circular argument. So I found something that was very, very revealing. It was a statement from an AME minister. In fact, he was one of the successors of Richard Allen at Bethel AME, the home church of the AME church. And he was speaking about 1870, about the camp meetings, about the tent revivals and the black presence there. And there was lots of references to essentially ring shouts and patting juba and all sorts of Afrocentric rhythm and dance and vocal expressions. And his comment about them was very, very telling, because what he said about these was that they were heathenish, that they were uncivilized. And that's a very telling comment. Because what he's saying is European culture, European musical forms, European approaches to music are civilized and acceptable. Afrocentric forms and approaches to music and culture are not. And that's a staggering thing to think about. And especially if you think about what Joplin did with those Afrocentric forms. It's very diluted, of course. But Joplin, and this is the cool part, Scott Joplin demonstrated for the first time that Afrocentric musical structures had validity in the broader musical world. Scott Joplin